Nobody arrived at the Boston Major expecting North America to break an over 4-year drought of major championships. Cloud9 had been regular semi-finalists elsewhere, but simply could not get past the elite teams in the rankings, and rivals Team Liquid were fading in form. The dominant storyline at this major would be the seemingly imminent coronation of FaZe Clan, stacked with all-time greats, but with 4 of them lacking a major themselves. How ironic that focus would prove to be in the end. The Major is Counter-Strike's World Championship, even if iterations of the competition typically take place more than once a year. There is no more prestigious single tournament a player can win in his CSGO career. Most significantly for this story is that no North American team had ever won a major prior to Cloud9's epic run at the ELEAGUE Boston Major in early 2018. Team Liquid had previously made the final of a major a year and a half earlier, only to be thrashed by the Brazilians of SK there. The Complexity Core, which later became Cloud9's first CSGO roster, had finished top 4 at DreamHack Winter 2013, the first major, but were also convincingly handled in their elimination match, in this case at the hands of Fnatic. The major had somehow never worked out for Cloud9. Despite having had lineups that were arguably top 5 in the world at different points of many years, Cloud9 teams had seemingly never brought their best at the biggest competition. The best placing in the organisation's history, a quarterfinals finish, had come at ESL1 Cologne 2014, the first major anyone wore the jersey, and back when the core of Hiko, Sean Gares and Nothing was still active. This distinction went beyond merely Cloud9 though, and centred heavily on one name, Skadoodle. The once world-class sniper had the crushing circumstances of a major curse following him around. Despite being on top teams and himself a very good player for a number of the tournaments in question, Scar had never made it to the playoffs of a major. C9's Orpa had attended 8 majors, the first 4 with iBuyPower and then 4 more with Cloud9. Each time he had come away disappointed. Considering Skadoodle came to Boston in arguably the worst form of his career, there was little reason to imagine Boston was the sacred spot upon which he would break his curse. Fate had other plans in mind. Due to having failed to make an impact on PGL Krakow, the previous major, Cloud9 had a spot at the ELEAGUE Boston Major, but would have to start from the very beginning of the competition. The Swiss system format threw up 2 gimmies early on, with Envy and Sprout far from dangerous sides at a tournament of this magnitude. Cloud9 led the whole game to secure a 16-11 cash win over the French, and easily rolled over the Germans of Sprout 16-5 on Inferno. Just like that, Cloud9 was sitting 1 win from progressing to the top 16. Drawing Mouse Sports was much tougher, the team they had narrowly beaten 2.5 months or so ago in the semi-finals of DreamHack Open Denver. That was a series in which the only map not very close was Mouse's win, and the other 2 were right down to the wire. In the meantime, Mouse had only gotten stronger, arguably, and a finals finish at ECS Season 4 Finals, the last tournament of 2017, had them poised to potentially be a dark horse. Thankfully for Cloud9, that was not the Mouse that turned up in this game, which the NA side won easily 16-5, with Automatic registering a +16 kill to death differential. Cloud9 had reached the top 16, their graveyard for the past couple of years, with relative ease, and looked loose and ready to take a crack at the better teams. Stewie and the gang met a familiar foe in the form of Shox's G2 in the opener of the next Swiss system phase. The French super team quickly set the tone that the competition would be tougher in this phase, swiftly reaching a 16-8 cash win despite strong play from Tarek. The next opponent was online upset specialist Space Soldiers, who had never reached top 8 at a major, and C9's love for Cobble would be their undoing, as the Turks famously loved the map and managed to grind out a 16-13 win over Rush and the boys. The dream of the first Swiss phase had become a nightmare in the second, as Cloud9 found themselves a single map from elimination and yet another underwhelming final placing on the game's biggest stage. A game against the legendary, but at this point semi-washed up Virtus.pro was a nice tonic, allowing C9 to hold back the Reaper with a strong 16-7 Mirage performance. The duo of Stewie2K and Automatic reminded VP that every team falls off eventually and is replaced, even if these polls had defied such an inevitable outcome for so many years and so valiantly. The random draw of the Swiss system looked to have done C9 in when it drew Astralis for their 4th game of this phase. The Danes had only just gotten Superstar Device back, and he was not taking on his usual role of sniper. Nonetheless, the team that had been one of the very best over most of the previous year had even made playoff appearances at tournaments with stand-ins replacing Device. C9 needed to be on their best behaviour and very much were, smothering the major champions of around a year prior with an all-around team effort leading to an emphatic 16-6 train win. One map would determine if C9 fell again before the playoffs or made it to the Legends stage for the first time since almost 4 years prior. Fnatic was lurking in the pools of teams left, but C9 dodged the Swedes and landed Vega Squadron. The CIS squad were notorious for pulling out wild upsets, as FaZe and Liquid had already found out at this very major. With the game being played on Mirage, where Vega had just beaten Team Liquid, perhaps a few alarm bells were ringing, but they proved unnecessary. C9 crushed their opponents with a dominant 14-1 CT side being converted into a 16-4 win, a berth in the playoffs and a Legends spot for the next major. This time, Rush joined Stewie as a standout in the match. Cloud9 had averted the danger of again falling in group play and now would be among the teams potentially contending for the title itself. The bracket draw for the playoffs said otherwise though. Cloud9 found themselves drawn onto the side containing SK Gaming, Fnatic and G2 Esports. SK were the number 1 ranked team, Fnatic were coming off a pair of semi-finals finishes at EPL and ECS Offline Finals, and G2 contained France's most decorated names. The quarterfinals opponent was G2 Esports, who had beaten C9 on cash to start the previous phase of the tournament. This was a playoff series though, and G2 had not won one that mattered in many months, despite such a star-studded lineup. Many predicted a G2 victory in spite of that, perhaps still focusing on C9's issues making the playoffs. Rush pretty much won the 16-8 Mirage opener by himself, and IGL Tarek again struck big in the second map of Overpass to secure another strong win, this time 16-7. Skadoodle had even outfragged AWP counterpart Kenny S, still a contender for the best sniper in the game. C9 had swept the French aside to reach the first semi-finals or better finish in the organisation's history at the majors. In the semi-finals, Cloud9 would face SK Gaming and some demons from the previous year. When the core had been battling back with Shroud and Nothing in the summer, they had never been able to get past SK in the playoffs, with a sweep at ESL One Cologne 2017, sending the message that this team had a bad matchup in store for them. SK had since made a roster move and again reclaimed the top spot in the world, trading out Phelps for Bolts and winning 3 tournaments off the back of that. But eligibility rules meant Cloud9 would be facing the Phelps lineup they'd faced with their old roster back in Germany. SK had just played a close 3-map series with Fnatic, and Superstar Coldzera was already plus 36 after 7 maps played in the tournament. The series would feature lopsided games, but Jack's boys would be the ones emerging with victory in hand. The opener was a 16-3 Mirage beatdown, riding a monster T-half. C9 hoped to close out the series on Cobblestone, but SK struck back with a strong 16-8 win to level the series. In a deciding map against a core that had been in the playoffs of the last 6 majors, C9 would do the impossible and win out 16-9 on Inferno to progress to the final. Automatic had given SK flashbacks to the ESL Pro League Season 4 finals 14 months ago or so, as his plus 18 and 58 kills over the series proved instrumental in the win. The decider had again seen Tarek, the man of the hour, posting 121 ADR and 26 kills versus one of the game's most successful and legendary cores. For the first time in major history, an NA team not called Team Liquid would contest for the trophy itself in the final. Of course, there was the far from little matter of who C9 were facing on the other side of that stage in Boston. As previously mentioned, the central storyline of the ELEAGUE Boston Major was, will FaZe win? Not only were they a team filled with legendary names but mostly lacking this specific accomplishment, but the team had also won a number of titles and consistently reached top finishes in the months running up to the major. With SK Gaming, the key rival who FaZe had not been able to best, not boasting their original lineup, the sentiment was that FaZe had no excuses for anything but lifting the trophy. Cloud9 themselves knew only too well how powerful FaZe Clan could be, having been 3 times tortured by the multinational side in series play, twice in semi-finals, where they had been not only unable to win a map, but even worse, had only once reached double digits rounds won on a map. With no exaggeration, FaZe Clan were Cloud9's kryptonite at this point in time. A key factor behind this mismatch was the similarities of a loose playing style and an emphasis on individual skill. FaZe were also known to always ban Cobblestone, a Cloud9 favourite for many years. No amount of feel-good performances earlier in the competition made the prospect of taking down names like Guardian and Nico any easier. FaZe came in as heavy favourites to win this final. Cloud9 left the Veto facing what had been FaZe's 3 best maps for much of their tenure: Mirage, Overpass and Inferno. If the NA team could somehow win this series, then what excuses would naysayers have? A fine psychological framing if the players could manage it, but the task ahead of them remained intimidating. The Mirage opener saw Cloud9 not only reach double digits rounds 1, but get as many as 14 on the board. Alas, FaZe Clan took the map and in heartbreaking fashion. C9 had led 8-1 on the T side, mirroring their opener against SK, and would hold off a resurgence to finish the half 10-5. The second half was even early, which was good for C9, who reached 12-8, only for FaZe to be the ones finishing strong and taking the map. A rare breakout performance from Skadoodle, throwing down a +11 and 27 kills, was wasted as Carrigan's men had stolen away the first map, Cloud9's pick. Next up was the Overpass, where C9 had last managed to win 11 rounds against FaZe, so Carrigan and company must have expected to close the series there. Instead, C9 again were frontrunners early, but this time would not yield, turning a 12-3 CT half into a 16-10 win to push the series into a decider. With the win a team-wide effort, one can imagine confidence was running high. That third map, with the major on the line, was an inferno few who saw it will ever forget. When FaZe had begun their run as a championship side with this roster, famously dominating ESL1 New York 4 months earlier, Inferno had been a map they seemingly could not be beaten on. Cloud9 continued to thumb their noses at history as they opened the map again with a strong start, going up 5-1 as T on the classically balanced map. FaZe fought all the way back to 5-5 and from there looked to be asserting themselves in a manner which brought back nightmare memories for C9's players. Carrigan's men would outright win the first half 8-7 despite their start, win the second pistol and go up 13-8 and later 14-9. C9 fought back initially, but Nico and the would-be kings of Counter-Strike continued on to championship point at a daunting 15-11. Heroics from Tarek ensured C9 survived the first of the potential 4 championship points FaZe would have. The 29th round saw FaZe low on money and C9 farmed the round off the back of Stewie's AWPing to reach the final round of regulation play at this major. Said round would prove to be epic. After a number of rounds in which Carrigan had seemed off in his calls, the Great Dane seemed to have found the perfect moment to come up with a read. With 10 seconds remaining on the clock, FaZe had, despite being down a man, successfully convinced C9 to rotate a man off B. FaZe headed there, threw their utility and 3-man rushed it, with the 4th attempting to cut off rotations in CT spawn. 3 AWP kills back to back to back put FaZe into a scenario of no planted bomb and 1 second remaining. That second ticked off and C9 had somehow completed their unlikely comeback to tie the map and reach overtime. There was a magical feeling in the air and the Wonderland continued for Tarek and company as they remained on the CT side and won all 3 rounds in the first half, extending their streak of rounds won to 6 in a row at this point. Most importantly, C9 now had not just their first championship point of the major, but potentially 3 cracks at taking home the win. FaZe looked shook, but were able to frag their way out of trouble and reach a 17-18 scoreline. A 2-for-1 for C9 against an A+ Guardian at B could have given the blue and white the win, but the legendary Slovakian came up big. FaZe took the opener of the second session and found themselves in a tight 2v2 at 19-18, but Tarek was able to ensure C9 were back to winning ways. The next round was a whitewash with 4 C9 players surviving. C9 again escaped the tricky situation by overcoming a 3v3 on the A site to go up 21-19 and again reach championship point. What would prove to be the final round of the tournament was fittingly won in the B bomb site and with Skadoodle killing Guardian to seal the deal. 2.5 years prior, the two had been battling for the status of best sniper in the game. Now, Skadoodle was far from the better player, but would become the only one of the two to win a major. Skadoodle finished the 3-map series against one of the world's elite teams with +24 and 79 kills to his name. Tarek, the leader, had come up with 77 of his own and the top ADR in the server. Automatic rang up a plus 15 and 75 kills. Stewie2K had outfragged all but one FaZe player over the entire series, despite ending up -2, and will forever be remembered for his heroics in the last round of regulation. Rush had started the previous year hoping for a dark horse major run with his former org Optic, only to see that team spiral down and end up winning a major a year later and in different colours. NA's drought ended, Skadoodle's curse was lifted, and the confetti rained down. A shell-shocked FaZe sat in their chairs, taking in the significance of their defeat, no doubt remembering their many championship point decisions, while Cloud9 celebrated one of the most epic underdog wins in Counter-Strike history. Cloud9 were the ELEAGUE Boston Major champions. The win served as redemption, narratively, for the best C9 lineups of yesteryear who had not gotten their best results at the major. The victory got the monkey off NA's back and gave its fans a near-perfect David and Goliath memory to reminisce on in the hard days to come. For Counter-Strike, it goes down as one of the most exciting finals, with an atmosphere attached to it matched by very few ever hosted.